What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 12 team in my power rankings heading into the 2024 NFL season, as today we take a deep dive into the LA Rams. And this ranking last year went down as one of my worst rankings in the history of this series. You know, putting them 31st certainly didn't age well, we'll just say that. And it's one thing if an unproven team with an unproven young quarterback comes out and is a success story. It's a whole nother thing for me to doubt a team that had Matthew Stafford, Aaron Donald, and Sean McVay. And they went on to be one of the best, most entertaining teams in all of football last season. But now, for 2024, with renewed expectations, today we're going to talk about if they can live up to those newfound expectations after some signature losses on the defensive side of the ball. Not just Raheem Morris, but of course, a guy named Aaron Donald, who's kind of a big deal. So it's going to be a fun deep dive today. Make sure you hit that like button as we head in. It really does help me out. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our 11 remaining deep dives here and all of my regular season content. And without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off by reviewing their offseason, where they got better, where they got worse. And as we look at the coaching staff, I do say downgraded as they lose Raheem Morris, the next coordinator in line to get a head coaching job after working for Sean McVay, this time on the defensive side of the ball. Morris heads to Atlanta, and they promote internally to an interesting name here, Chris Shula. Yes, the grandson of Don Shula. He looks to take over this Rams defense. Going to be fun to talk about him in a little bit here. But as we look at the roster, the quarterback room, I actually am going to say slightly upgraded because Matthew Stafford is a quarterback that has some durability questions. This is a team where the backup quarterback is perhaps more notable than other teams, and they bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, who I do still think is a very capable backup in the NFL. He is going to be suspended for the first 2 games, and Carson Wentz did step in and give them a good Week 18 performance last season. You could say him and Jimmy are a push, but he was generally not there for the Rams last year. They had to endure some Brett Rypien last year, which was a pain to watch. So having that backup generally available this year, I think, is a slight upgrade to the quarterback room, especially when Brett Rypien was as bad as he was when he had to play. At running back, I am going to say slightly upgraded. Not that I didn't like the Blake Corum pick, but Royce Freeman did run hard for this team last year, and we don't know how much of an impact Corum's going to have here in his rookie season. And they also brought in Boston Scott, a fun little scat back addition to the Rams this year. Also slightly upgraded with the tight end room. They bring in one of my guys, Colby Parkinson, excited for him to get perhaps a larger opportunity here with the Rams. And I would otherwise just say upgraded, but you have to note that Tyler Higbee is coming off a late season ACL injury and is going to start the season on the PUP. So it gets knocked down from upgraded to slightly upgraded with that injury. Wide receiver, I'm going to say neutral. They traded Ben Skoranek to the Texans after drafting Jordan Whittington in the 6th round. Another player I'm excited to talk about, buried down on the depth chart right now, but shouldn't have too much of an impact this season, saying neutral at wide receiver. And then on the offensive line, this was a focus for them. They go out and spend money on Jonah Jackson in free agency, 3 years, $52 million. They also draft Bo Limmer in the 6th round, KT Leviston in the 7th round, and they do lose their starting center, Coleman Shelton, but he's not quite what Jonah Jackson is, so we're going to upgrade it on the offensive line. But then you look at the defense, and just as we've had some units in recent episodes where I give that purple-coated, massively upgraded note on a position group, gotta say massively downgraded for the interior of the defensive line, losing Aaron Donald. The best football player of the last decade when you take positional focus out of it. And not just the individual production that Aaron Donald brought to the table, but the Aaron Donald effect no longer here, where you know where double teams and slides are going towards. It's a big, big deal, and the biggest thing that this defense is going to have to overcome this year. And they also lost a nice role player in Jonah Williams. Obviously not quite as big of a deal, but 53% of their snaps in a fairly key role in that sort of 4-eye early down player that is going to have to be replaced. And in terms of replacing those guys, they draft Braden Fisk in the second round. I've got some takes on Braden Fisk. Excited to talk about him later on. And then Tyler Davis out of Clemson in the sixth round. But one area they are also hoping to complement the loss of Aaron Donald, I suppose, is adding in the edge room, where they spend the first round pick on Jared Verse and another fifth round pick in Brennan Jackson. So you do have clear upgrades, at least with one portion of your defensive line there. Linebacker, really untouched, which came as a bit of a surprise considering how thin that group is, but staying neutral. And then cornerback, they were busy. So a pair of starters from last year are not back with this year's team. Darion Kendrick is still on the team, but unfortunately tore his ACL not long ago, so he's going to miss this season. Probably wasn't slated to start anyway, but was going to be in the mix. And then Akello Witherspoon, who played okay for them last year, 94% of the snaps, not back with the Rams. But they go and bring Darius Williams back. Was an interesting cut decision by the Jags as they changed schemes. A huge luxury for the Rams that they were able to get him back, who they know is going to fit this system, fit this culture. Really good player. Nice addition to get him back in the building after a little summer camp in Jacksonville. And then another interesting one, Tre'Davious White. This one obviously caught a lot of headlines when the Bills released him, but the reality is he just has not been that all-pro corner that he was 3 years ago. Has missed a huge bucket of games, and it's just a question of what you're going to get from him, but certainly a fun flyer for this team to make. And then I believe as a reaction to the Darion Kendrick injury, they brought in Jerry Jacobs, who's started a lot of games for the Lions with, let's just say, mixed results. But I am saying upgraded, really surrounding around the Darius Williams edition, and then we'll see what Tre'Davious White can give them. At safety, this one was also interesting. Two players that I have consistently compared to each other, Jordan Fuller and Cameron Curl, basically getting flipped here. Jordan Fuller, not an exact team flip, but for the Rams, they're just switching these guys around. Jordan Fuller goes to the Panthers in free agency, and they signed Cameron Curl. Curl did get a little bit more money than Fuller, but in terms of level of play, I look at that as pretty neutral. And then they did spend a third-round pick on Cameron Kinchins. Not sure how much he'll play this year. But shuffling some bodies around, I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a better group than it was last year, but it shouldn't be worse. And then at special teams, a lot of change here in the kicker room. Brett Mayer and Lucas Havrisik were horrible last year. I said in the Packers deep dive in our last episode that they had the worst kicker room in the league. And I know there were some Patriots fans that chimed in that it was probably them, and you guys have a point as well. But we got to throw the Rams into the mix here. They missed 24% of their kicks last year and 13% of their PATs between Mayer and Havrisik. So, Josh Carty, a sixth-round pick, and Tanner Brown, entirely unproven kickers, but it's going to be tough for them to be worse than what they got last year. So even though they did some nice stuff this offseason, I do got to say, man, the Rams were one of the offseasons that I would say they are worse off than they were last year because of the Aaron Donald retirement. I think they did finish the year much better than the 12th team last year, and you would hope to come into the year putting yourself in an even better position based on what they accomplished last year. And I think it was, unfortunately, 2 steps forward, 1 step back this year with the Aaron Donald retirement. And once we get to the defensive breakdown, they're going to have their hands full trying to make this defense work without Aaron Donald and Raheem Morris, a change in defensive coordinator, as they try to make that happen. But that's a nice transition to our next segment here, where we're going to talk about the coaching staff for the Rams, how they rank against the rest of the league, as well as what this team's going to look like schematically speaking. And that's going to start with Sean McVay, a very well-documented head coach. And, heading into last year, we knew he was a great head coach. And even though I ranked the Rams incorrectly, I did say, Sean McVay is not going to let that Rams team finish with any less than 5 or 6 wins. And he took it a step further than that. And I do think last year was kind of the last step, at least for me, in terms of putting Sean McVay into that truly elite tier of head coaches. He wasn't far behind it, but after a bad 2022 season and heading into last year without many expectations, he shattered them, killed it with the Rams. And now I do look at Sean McVay really neck and neck with like Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid specifically as the alpha elite tier of unbelievable head coaches in this league that just elevate their teams to a level that we often underrate, just as I did last year. And that's very well reflected in the coaching rankings for the Rams. I mentioned third among head coach rankings in the league. Their overall coach and culture ranking, which acts as that sort of benefit of the doubt slider within this series, they rank second to fifth, essentially elite, but there is one team that we haven't discussed in this series that does kind of come in a tier of their own in terms of coach and culture. But the pass game coaching ranks first to fourth, as good as it gets in terms of designing the pass game. And then for run game coaching, I think this was a big part of Sean McVay climbing up that last rung on the ladder, if you will. If there had been a criticism of Sean McVay up to last year, it was that he had never really gotten the run game truly working, other than a little bit when he had Todd Gurley. But last year completely evolved this offense and had one of the most efficient run games in the league. Should be even better this year as well, by the way. And that's a good transition to talk about what the scheme is here for McVay and the Rams. And it's a well covered scheme. I mean, we haven't even revealed the Rams yet, and we've already spent a lot of time talking about Sean McVay's scheme because so many other teams look at what the Rams are doing and try to replicate that. But McVay's offense, I think at this point, I am going to fully separate the McVay scheme from the Shanahan scheme. You know, you go back 6 years ago, and McVay was essentially running the same stuff Kyle Shanahan was running, with that heavy dose of wide zone runs and the threat of play action off of that to destroy defenses over the middle of the field. And of course, a lot of those concepts and principles are still very much here in LA. They are still going to run a lot of play action and even a lot of wide zone. But there have been some key evolutions that Sean McVay has uncovered within his offense here for the Rams that are very different nowadays from what Kyle Shanahan's doing. And you got to go back to the early days of McVay getting here, where I think the first evolution was becoming essentially an all 11 personnel team. 11 personnel is 3 wide receivers, 11 being the 1 and 1 to represent 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then of course the other 3 skill players are receivers. Whereas Shanahan's offenses, not that he doesn't run 11 personnel, but definitely like to give you a fair share of 12 personnel or 21 personnel, being 2 tight ends or a running back and a fullback. But you rewind the clock to when McVay was really getting going with the Rams, and he looked at his team, his roster, and said, well, our offense is best. If I want to utilize our best players, it's going to be best with our 3 wide receivers out there all the time. And that was Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, and Cooper Kupp. And a part of that was saying we have extremely physical, strong wide receivers in guys like Woods and Cooper Kupp that can do a lot of the roles that I would normally ask of that second tight end or a fullback. So he started taking those Cooper Kupps, Robert Woods. Nowadays, it's Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. We saw this with Ben Skoranek. I think this is part of how they're going to use Colby Parkinson this year, but that wide receiver that's really flexed in tight to the line of scrimmage, almost as a second tight end. And you'll see that guy blocking cross formation, where as long as he can just get a piece of the defensive end or whoever they're asking him to block, that will work. Or you'll see these guys, you know, as a part of that team that's sealing the edge for the wide zone blocking. But what McVay realized was there's a huge advantage to being an 11 personnel as opposed to 12 personnel, in that the defense is basically forced to make a decision of either matching with nickel personnel, taking an extra linebacker or defensive lineman off the field, getting lighter against the run to account for the coverage requirements of having 3 wide receivers on the field, or they're going to put themselves in base against that look where you are going to have a massive speed advantage against the personnel that the defense is bringing out there. And while the defense is kind of handicapped by this, his team really isn't, because that extra, big wide receiver can do a lot of the stuff that second tight end or the fullback would be able to do. So he's able to stay adaptable, but the defense becomes more handicapped. And that was, again, just like the first kind of aha moment for McVay. And he's, to this day, runs the highest percentage of 11 personnel in the league. I think it was like 87% or something like that. But there's been some other sort of aha moments for Sean McVay. I think the next one came when Matthew Stafford arrived. And he goes from Jared Goff, who was much more of a, I will just say, system limited quarterback, where to that point it was still a lot of under center, play action, turn your head to the, turn your back to the defense type of stuff, the Kyle Shanahan offense in a nutshell. But Matthew Stafford comes in here with a decade of experience, and the ability to run empty offenses where they're going 5 wide out there. But instead of 5 wide, of course, it's still 11 personnel, where you've got a running back and a tight end out there playing wide receiver. And not only are you allowing Matthew Stafford to run a lot of stuff that he thrives in, running offense out of empty, but this almost essentially forces the defense to play you in nickel. Because if you're going to show in the huddle 11 personnel, and they know based on your tendencies, there's a pretty solid chance that you're going to come out in empty, playing base against that is a death wish. So they have to come out in nickel. And then last year, he realized, okay, they are always going to play us in nickel. And if that's the case, why would we stick to this wide zone running scheme where we're always running into the teeth of the defense? In many ways, it's a gift to run toss and wide zone against a nickel defense. He says, no, that's dumb. Let's go get Kevin Dotson, Steve Avila, and smash these MFers. If they're going to come out with, 6 big bodies in the box every single play, let's go right at them. And that was the final transition. Instead of, mashing wide zone all the time here, they led the league in duo last year. And there's no doubt they're going to lean even heavier into that as they invested in another interior offensive lineman this year, in Jonah Jackson. So it's been really fun to see McVay really morph away from the true Shanahan offense. And in the past, we've said, it's a Shanahan-McVay style offense. I think it's reached a point where those are two very different terms nowadays. But we obviously feel very good about where the Rams are sitting in terms of offensive coaching. It's really as good as it gets. They do have Mike LaFleur as the offensive coordinator. He might get another shot somewhere else soon, considering the Jets are just so dysfunctional. That was his first crack at it. Obviously, Matt's brother. Nice guy to have in the building for sure. As a left-hand man. But let's talk about the defensive scheme. So Chris Shula gets promoted. He is unproven, and for that reason, the defensive coach rankings are going to come in a little bit lower. But there is some carryover here, and reason to believe that this is going to be a pretty easy transition. So they're going to come in with a B- grade for pass defense coaching. That gets them 22nd to 28th. Below average, but still pretty solid to good. Run defense coaching is going to be as low as it gets, right there next to the Packers from our last deep dive, 31st to 32nd. And that's because this team really hasn't even done that well against the run, even with Raheem Morris. So still a lot to prove in that regard. But with Chris Shula, obviously very fun bloodlines, they are promoting him internally, essentially hoping to keep this thing going. And he has been a member of this Rams staff really for the majority of his NFL coaching career. He did begin as a quality control coach for the Chargers in 2015 to 2016, but then the Rams hired him. He was under Wade Phillips, but then most notably under Brandon Staley and then Raheem Morris, who really just continued the same defensive structure that Brandon Staley had implemented here for the Rams. And that is really just the Fangio defense, the Vic Fangio defense, with some tweaks and adjustments here. Most notably, the Fangio defense that is primarily going to hit you with cover 4 and cover 6 the majority of the time. The Rams, over the last few years, have really been more of a cover 3 team, though last year they saw an uptick in both cover 4 and cover 6. They ran about 20% cover 4, another 8 to 10% cover 6, which was definitely more than they had ran the previous 2 years under Raheem Morris, where they were much more cover 3. But the principles are still very much the same here. It's that 3-4 base structure, if you will, where your edge linebackers are in a stand-up position with the ability to drop into coverage. They kind of infamously dropped Michael Hoyt, who's like a 300-pound edge player. He was like 4th in the NFL in coverage drops for an edge rusher. So they definitely appreciate the sort of confusion that dropping an edge rusher into coverage can cause the quarterback, though that can lead to some frustrating moments when you end up with basically a defensive tackle end up on a slot wide receiver sometimes. Look, as a Packers fan that saw Joe Barry run this defense for years, there's aspects of this defense that do drive me crazy. But beyond the front, they really lean into this idea that, all right, we're going to play bend, don't break defense. We're going to play our corners off, run cover 4, cover 6, pattern matching cover 3. And while we do that, we are going to basically show too high pre-snap, make every coverage look the same. But after the snap, the quarterback's going to have no idea which direction those guys are rotating. So the idea is we're going to play bend, don't break, be pretty squishy in between the 20s, and then hopefully cause some confusion, get after it up front. And if we can force a turnover or 2 every week, we should be in a pretty good spot defensively. And then once you get down in the red zone, you hope you can tighten up and allow field goals, not touchdowns. That's kind of the overall philosophy on a Fangio defense. And I've been pretty hard on some teams like the Packers and the Browns and the Vikings for trying to run this stuff. And those criticisms have held up. All those defensive coordinators have since been fired. But if you're the Rams and you're Sean McVay and you feel pretty confidently that you can have a top 5 offense every year, there is something to be said about, like, okay, just don't allow 27 points. I'll get you 25 plus. But you get me a couple turnovers, turn long drives into field goals, we can win the majority of our games 27-24. I think there's something to be said about, in this structure, it can work, especially for a team that over the last 3 years has lacked a lot of talent on the back end. This has not been a team that has the flexibility to be a press man style defense. So I think in terms of how they build this team and how their overall philosophy works, it can and has worked for the Rams. And there's a reason they do this, even if this defense does have its very frustrating moments. And I would say it kind of caps their overall upside at this point, because your run defense in this structure often struggles because these defenses don't want to load the box. They want to play two safeties pre-snap. That's the idea of the defense. And the overall philosophy is going to allow quick outlets, to the offense, free releases into the second level of the defense. You're a lot of times just allowing the opposing offense to march into your own territory. And that's playing with fire. But it's a fire that they're comfortable with because the offense is so well set up. But with that, let's get into the goods here. The roster breakdown, where we are going to start by ranking the quarterback room. And there's going to be some people that come out and say I'm way too high on Matthew Stafford here. But for me, this is a case of the film does not lie. I have Matthew Stafford ranked as the 4th best passing quarterback in the NFL, though it's tight with some of the other guys in this range. And when you factor in the impact in the run game that some of these better athletes at the position have on the overall offense, including the run game, of course, Matthew Stafford slides down to my 6th overall quarterback. But I'm pretty convicted in this, man. His film is so impressive, and it's gone so under the radar. And I get why it's gone under the radar, right? Because he comes to the Rams, and in that 2022 season, or the 2021-2022 season, when they won the Super Bowl, his regular season was very average. First year in the offense, he made a lot of mistakes, got a little banged up, which is another part of this, why people overlook him, I think. But the thing is, he's been playing at this level basically from about the point that the playoffs rolled around, and he went on really one of the more underrated quarterbacking Super Bowl runs of the last 5 to 10 years. He was unstoppable in those playoffs. Something really clicked at the right time for that Rams team. And then you get to 2022, And the team just fell apart. Matthew Stafford fell apart. He missed, like half the season. The offensive line was horrible. Cooper Kupp wasn't there. And even myself dismissed the impact that injuries had on that Rams team. So his last 2 regular seasons have been very middle to below average. But I think that's gotten in the way of people appreciating and understanding just quite the level of quarterback that Matthew Stafford is bringing to the table right now. And even last year, he did miss a game and a half. And that just reinforces people's idea that he's just old, banged up, not what he used to be. And they just kind of dismiss this idea that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. But in the 15 and a half games that he played last year, you could certainly make an argument, just as Caleb Williams did with Kay Adams at training camp yesterday, that Matthew Stafford was the best quarterback in the NFL last year. And I don't like those big sweeping statements, but at this point I have watched significant film on all these guys, and he is right up there with anybody you would put in that conversation from last season. And honestly, you talk to people within the industry that are taking the time to watch the film, and that's kind of a consensus opinion, is like, yeah, he's kind of a man on fire right now. But the general people just aren't talking about it. But in terms of like what he's actually doing out there and why I say that, I mean, it comes back to a lot of the stuff we said about Kirk Cousins, where, yeah, he's old, and I think people think it's impossible for him to be playing his best quarterback at 36 years old. But that age is a weapon that he has that very few quarterbacks in the league right now do. The experience that he has, he's just played so much football at this point. There is not a blitz or a coverage that you can throw at Matthew Stafford that he hasn't seen before, that he doesn't have a memory bank of information for how to beat it. And he's turned into more of a surgeon than he ever has been. I think he's playing the best quarterback in his career, even though he is up there in age and has been dealing with some durability issues. And for Kirk with this, we talked about how the evolution in his game at this age is just always knowing where the ball needs to get to, not just within the structure of the play, but under pressure when the play breaks down. He just knows where those safety outlets are, whether it's a dump down or that guy sitting down in a soft spot in a zone. But with Kirk, it's usually a short to maybe an intermediate throw. 0 to 10 yards is usually where Kirk is going with the football in those pressure situations. Matthew Stafford, his safety outlet a lot of the time is a backside dig 20 yards down the field and a back-breaking big-time throw against the defense. And his ability to hit those consistently without putting the ball in harm's way, I mean, you might get 1 or 2 ugly interceptions where he assumes it's going to be there and it's not, and the safety's there to cut it off for a pick. But you would think if your safety outlet when you're under pressure is to throw a 20-yard dig in the middle of the defense, you would think he's throwing 10 picks off of that every year, and he's just not. Way more often than not, he's completing those. And he's able to do that because his arm talent is still ridiculous. Not just raw arm strength, but he can still hit those throws while he's stepping up on the run or fading away against pressure. And the ability to make those throws shows up in other areas of his game. I mean, I don't know if there's a quarterback that threw more beautiful, deep outs last year. He's right up there with like Justin Herbert and, yes, even Trevor Lawrence in terms of like, you have to defend every single blade of grass until the whistle blows against Matthew Stafford, because even if you get pressure, if you're running zone and you're leaving that 15-yard, 20-yard out to the opposite side of the field from the opposite end of the blitz, and you're leaving that space open and saying, yeah, if the quarterback puts it there, we'll live with it. Well, against Matthew Stafford, he will put it there every time, even off his back foot or while getting hit. And just in general, some of the placement on these throws, throwing guys open against tight coverage, I mean, he is just truly playing this position as well as anybody in the league right now. And I'm not going to come out and rank him, in the elite tier with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. I think that's a step too far because the sample size of him playing at this level is a little bit smaller and some of the injury concerns. But I'm definitely higher on Matthew Stafford, man. And as long as he's healthy, I am never going to bet against this Rams team again. Now, part of the reason I did rank them lower last year was I didn't know if he could stay healthy. And even last year, he did miss a game and a half. And I would argue that game and a half is what cost him the MVP. Left his production just short, and it ended up costing the Rams a big win, which unfortunately carries a lot of weight in the MVP discussion. They ended up going to Green Bay with Brett Rippon and looked entirely flat, lost that game. It's funny to think, like, man, Green Bay might not have had that miracle playoff run if Matthew Stafford never got hurt. But I think that's also a testament to his sort of overall MVP case as well, as what this team was with Brett Rippon in there. It was horrible. They scored 3 points against Joe Barry's defense in Green Bay. But because of some of the durability questions, I think it's a really nice signing to bring in Jimmy Garoppolo here as the backup. Because now if Stafford's ribs or his shoulder or his back are hurting, they have the luxury of leaning on the side of caution a little bit more. Give him a rest week or whatever so he can get through the season and be at full health in the playoffs. I mean, even in that playoff game, he came off for a snap or two against Detroit. Now, no one's going to question his toughness to fight through these injuries, but maybe it's something to consider for the Rams where you look at a Week 7 game against the Raiders on their schedule or a Week 11 game against New England. If a team late in the season becomes a shell of themselves because of injuries or whatever, and it looks like you have more of a cakewalk type of week, they might be able to give Matthew Stafford a little bit of an extra bye and feel like Jimmy Garoppolo can step in and still give them a good chance to win that football game. I think it's something that we very realistically might see this season. And Jimmy was obviously kind of a wash with the Raiders last year, has had a falling out from being a starter in the league very quickly. But I still think going back to I know it's not, we talked about how it's not a Shanahan offense anymore, but a lot of the passing concepts are the same idea. With that play action, snap your head around, hit the crossing route over the middle. You're doing a lot of similar stuff conceptually. Garoppolo getting back to this style of offense, I think, will be a comfort zone for him. And I think when you look at what happened with the Raiders, he just wasn't a fit with Davante Adams, who is, Adams can do everything, but is at his best running go balls and back shoulders and working the sidelines. Jimmy Garoppolo is not an outside the numbers thrower of the football. He's one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the league in that department, and that blew up in the worst of ways for the Raiders last year. But the majority of targets within this Rams offense are over the middle of the field where Jimmy is much more comfortable. So I think he can play well as a backup for the Rams and actually play somewhat of a key role for this team where he maybe even plays a game or two, and that allows Stafford to get, fully recovered and playing at his best when they need him. He is suspended for 2 games, though, but I think they're obviously more than comfortable with that. They're expecting Stafford to be full health to start the year. They do have Stetson Bennett as well, 2-time national champion for the Georgia Bulldogs. Really athletic guy. I was a little surprised we didn't see him instead of Brett Rippon, just because I feel like they could do some fun stuff in the run game with him, but they clearly aren't super confident in how he's looked because they didn't go to him last year and they signed Jimmy this year. But you can hate on me all you want for ranking Stafford as the 4th best passing quarterback in the league. Again, 6th for overall quarterbacks. But I'm trusting my eyes on this one when healthy. This is as good of a quarterback in the league outside of that elite tier of dudes. But let's transition to the weapons, talk about who Stafford gets to throw to here. Definitely a really good group, as we saw last year. They get a B grade from me, which gets them in that tier 12th to 18th in the NFL. And anytime in the modern framework of the NFL, you're talking about being in the top half for weaponry, you're sitting very pretty. But this starts for me now with Puka Nacua. I think you have to look at him above Cooper Kupp. Even when the two were out there last year, Puka was the primary target, the dude they wanted to feed. So let's start with him, and then we'll also talk a lot about Cooper Kupp. But, what a legacy season for Puka Nacua. Will go down as one of the most memorable late day 3 diamonds that a team has found. and he comes out and breaks the rookie receiving record. I mean, just insane stuff here. And this wasn't a case of like, okay, they had nobody to throw to, and you just had an explosive offense peppering this dude with targets. Like, sure, they fed him the football, but he was 7th in the NFL in overall targets. But I think you get what I'm saying. This wasn't like, okay, we're just throwing him a bunch of short passes. He's going to lead the NFL in targets, 10 yards per reception, and we're just force-feeding the guy. No, he was like a high efficiency receiver as well. He ended up 8th in the NFL in yards per route run. And his film is just phenomenal, man. Like, jaw-dropping phenomenal. So many traits to like about him. Number one for me is actually the speed. I know he didn't test incredibly well, but he is one of these guys where his game speed is just way better than his 40 time. He ran a 4.57 40. I mean, even the biggest Puka Nacua hater would have to admit he plays a lot faster than that. And frankly, he plays a lot faster than a lot of guys that ran in the 4.3s. And a lot of the sort of GPS tracking stuff backs that up. Like, his game speed is, sure, not Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or anything like that, but it's way up there. And he's able to weaponize that in a variety of ways. I mean, number one, of course, is we talked about, like, in this offense, a lot of their route structures are going to include deep crossing routes. He just pulls away on them. He creates separation on those routes. Even the game's fastest corners struggle to keep up with him there. So he separates, but that speed shows up so much after the catch as well. There's a lot of Deebo Samuel in his game, frankly. Deebo's another guy that ran in the 4.5s, but when the ball gets in Deebo's hands, he just manages to be faster than everybody, and Puka has a little bit of that as well. So he's got super underrated game speed, but that's just the starting point. I mean, his physicality, I think, is the next point you have to talk about with him, and it shows up in every single aspect of the wide receiver position. Number one is winning tough catches at the catch point. He's not by height the biggest guy in the league, but his contested catch win percentage was 50% last year. That is exceptional. Now, his contested catches are out-muscling a dude out with outreached arms in traffic, as opposed to like a T. Higgins or Mike Evans, where they're asking him to go up and moss dudes at the sideline. It's a different type of contested catch. And then his physicality shows up after the catch as well. So, I mean, that's where another kind of Deebo parallel comes in. Deebo's not just faster than everybody with the ball in his hands, but he's incredibly good at breaking tackles, fighting for tough yardage. Puka was 11th in yards after the catch last year, but if you filter that down to dudes that got 50% of snaps, which narrows it down to 41 wide receivers, he was 4th in the NFL in yards after the catch. Deebo number 1, by the way. And then the physicality again and the play strength again shows up with how they use him in that blocking role. I mean, you could make a case he was the best blocking wide receiver in the NFL last year, certainly among true starting wide receivers. I mean, there might be like blocking specialists that come in, but even against those guys, I think Puka might be better. So he is a legitimate super weapon for the Rams. And what's crazy is I'm actually putting the up arrow on him because I think there's 3 areas that you could see even more from him. Number one, he dropped a crap ton of footballs last year. He had 4 more drops last year than anybody in the league and still broke the rookie receiving record. That, I think, can certainly be cleaned up. Number 2 is I think there's room for him to add nuance to his route running as a young player, different ways to set guys up and create even more separation on more routes. And then thirdly, I think just added chemistry with a guy like Matthew Stafford can lead to even more high leverage targets. Really the only question on him, and I hate to even bring it up, but it's still a creeping thought in my mind, is he did fall in the draft because he couldn't stay healthy in college. Even got hurt again at the Senior Bowl, where I was excited to see him, left after the first day. And you pair that with his play style, and it's like, you can kind of understand how he's getting banged up. And already in camp, he's dealing with some stuff. So I'm not going to put the injury flag on him or anything like that, but that is the one thing that you would say could slow this man down. So we'll certainly say our prayers to the football gods to keep Puka on the football field. And As we transition to Cooper Kupp, I mean, we got to say our prayers there as well to the football gods. And Cooper Kupp's not just durability has become much more of a question mark for him, but also just like, what is Cooper Kupp at 31 and a half years old now after some injuries that have kept him off the football? What caliber football player is Cooper Kupp? And for that reason, he does get that new up and down arrow that we've been using for this series, giving him an 85 grade, saying, well, we know a healthy Cooper Kupp is much better than that. A healthy Cooper Kupp is a top 5 receiver in the NFL. But if this continues in the direction it's been going, he will probably underperform that rating as he has really the last 2 seasons. And even when he's been on the field, he hasn't quite been the good old Cooper Kupp. And there's much more reason to believe that he is much more fading away here than he is going to bounce back and be the old Cooper Kupp. And I think there's 2 areas where we've seen some regression. Number 1, with the ball skills and the drops. He just simply wasn't coming down with balls that he has in his prime. Some of them were very easy catches that he just dropped uncharacteristically, and then some of them are some of those trust throws, the through contact, crazy body control catches that Cooper Kupp has made in the past. Definitely doesn't feel like he's quite in the zone right now in terms of making some of those plays. And it's hard to say if that is a physical body control issue or if he's just not, I think in the zone is a good way to put it. You know, when you're on and off the field dealing with injuries, have a creeping pain in your mind when you're trying to focus, it can hurt your ability to come down with some of those catches. But the other area would be explosiveness after the catch. And that's where I do think we've seen a little bit of a physical decline, but also how much of an ankle injury or whatever is he dealing with that is slowing down his acceleration. But the thing that Cooper Kupp in his prime, I think, was his superpower was I think he had the best acceleration after the catch among receivers in the league. Maybe not the best top speed, but his ability to break angles by going 0 to 60 at the snap of a finger in a half a step was really unique. And that definitely showed up in his route running and his ability to separate at his breaking point as well. And a hampered Cooper Kupp, as we saw last year, is still a useful number 2 wide receiver. But if he can get back to form and pair that now with what they've unlocked in Puka Nacua, you are talking about quite possibly the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. And that might sound crazy, but I don't think that's crazy. Where Puka was a top 8 receiver in the league last year, could only be getting better. Cooper Kupp, when healthy, is a top 5 wide receiver. That shouldn't sound that crazy. Even if these guys aren't like traditional perimeter separators and you know, those types of dudes. They're both more kind of tough, intermediate weapons. But needless to say, I mean, Cooper Kupp and his health are a wild card variable for this team. They grade out in that kind of good middle cluster of weapons around the NFL. But if Cooper Kupp gets back to form, you're talking about easily top 10 in terms of weapons. If he can't stay on the field and he's just kind of a low-end number 2, as he kind of was last year when he was on the field, they're still a good group, but not quite an elite tandem. But they've got other guys to throw the football to as well. You've got Demarcus Robinson here, which is certainly a name people will look at and be like, oh, wow, Demarcus Robinson's their number 3 wide receiver? I mean, if Cooper Kupp gets hurt, they're screwed. Well, not exactly. I mean, Demarcus Robinson has been steadily getting better throughout his career, really since he left the Chiefs. And even when he was on the Chiefs, he was like a functional player, ideally a wide receiver 4 at that point in time. But I thought Demarcus Robinson played well for the Ravens, despite a couple of frustrating drops, and really played well for the Rams last year, enough so that they gave him a decent-sized contract extension for what he is. Now, I'm certainly not counting on him to emerge in some situation where Cooper Kupp is gone. I'm not counting on him to emerge as a number 2 wide receiver, but we talked about those backside digs that Matthew Stafford loves to throw. And Demarcus Robinson's really good at that route. He's got the speed to kind of get to those landmarks in time. He's got enough size and quickness to separate at the top of his break on those routes. And he really showed to be a reliable asset in that phase of the game. He also blocks. He can do some stuff to the sideline that some of these other wide receivers don't do. It sounds crazy to say this, but they use him the same way they used Odell Beckham in this offense, a role that I think they missed in that 2022 season after they won the Super Bowl with him. So he's not going to blow you away, but within the confines of this offense, he's a very useful player. And he's going to make some big catches for this team in big moments as the year goes on. Then you got Tutu Atwell. He brings a little bit of juice to this team. Tutu is another guy that I think gets dismissed here because he had a slow start to his career and is just so tiny. But he's actually, when he's been healthy, he's actually been a pretty nice weapon for the Rams. Creates a lot of separation. And he's actually come down with some tough catches that you wouldn't expect such a small guy to make. And again, I just think the word useful is a good way to describe Tutu Atwell. Don't expect too much from him, but he can definitely make some big plays for this team as well. I love the Jordan Whittington. The depth chart is actually very good here. We're now at wide receiver 5, and it's still a player I like in Whittington. I said before he got drafted, he's a unique player, but that I would love to see him go to a team that would use him as a big slot wide receiver, something like I said, a Juwan Jennings or Ben Skoranek, Alan Lazard role, where they can lean into his size, his physicality, and his run after catch ability. And he goes to the Rams, and 2 weeks later, they trade away Ben Skoranek. I like Jordan Whittington a lot. This year, he's probably not going to play much because Puka does that stuff, Cooper Kupp does that stuff, and they even brought in a Colby Parkinson that I think when all their tight ends are healthy can do some of that stuff as that big slot wide receiver. But a year from now, things could change here. Parkinson could be their number 1 tight end. Cooper Kupp could no longer be with this football team. Whittington's role there could increase. So for your deep dynasty leagues, certainly keep an eye on Jordan Whittington. It kind of stops there. There's a couple more names to mention as there's probably going to be 6 wide receivers that make this team. Tyler Johnson has a lot of talent, but is one of those guys that fell in the draft and people were like, why did he fall in the draft? It comes out character issues. And seemingly those character issues have shown up in the NFL. Was a guy that could never get on the same page with Tom Brady. But if he's matured, there is talent there. And then, Xavier Smith, Drake Stoops, Oklahoma fans will pound the table for him. But the guy I actually like is Sam Wiglas, who caught my eye. I think I was watching tape on Quinyon Mitchell. I can't remember exactly who I was watching, but got to see him in a game for Ohio. Was actually an Ohio State guy that transferred away. Couldn't crack the lineup of Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they have another guy next year. Transfers out of that room and goes to Ohio and played well when healthy. Familiar theme for this Rams wide receiver room. But if he makes the team, kind of fit the mold of these wide receivers that they like. So we'll see there. But let's talk about the tight ends. I mean, you got Tyler Higbee. I think will play this year. Probably going to be on the pup for the first 4 to 6 weeks. And then you're talking about a 31 to 32-year-old tight end that has already shown signs of regression and is now coming off an ACL injury. Really hard to know what exactly you're going to get from Tyler Higbee. I still think he can make some plays. He's a big target for Stafford. He can surprise you with his route running at times. High effort blocker. He's got good size. He's very much that typical possession tight end and is solid at that when he's at full strength. But just hard to know how long he's going to be with this team and how good he's going to be in the games that he has left on this Rams team. And that's where the Colby Parkinson signing really comes in here. I think this was a brilliant signing by the Rams because as long as Higbee's out there, I actually think Parkinson will have a role within this offense. Parkinson entered the league as this weird 6'7", maybe 240-pound slot wide receiver really at Stanford. Just didn't play a lot of inline tight end at all, but incredible ball skills and blocked his ass off on the perimeter for Stanford. And the Seahawks have been so slowly building up his frame, getting him playing time and converting him into more of a full-time tight end. But he has that background of being much like that big slot wide receiver that we've described for this team. And I think he gives them the option of if they want to stay in their mind 11 personnel, but have that big slot wide receiver be much more of a tight end than he is a wide receiver, you can get that side out of Colby Parkinson. Granted, teams might match you in base if you do that, so there's still a trade-off. But he gives them that flexibility and also long-term upside, really, to replace Tyler Higbee. And I sure as hell am not going to just rule out Parkinson starting the first month of the season, plays really well, and Higbee comes in as a backup tight end, and they eventually let him go. Because to me, this is a player that his arrow has only been pointing up for a Seahawks team where, as we described, he came in not really ready to go as a tight end. And the last couple of years, he's been in a room with Will Dissly and Noah Fant. They've found ways to get him involved, but he just hasn't had that opportunity to show really what he is as a full-time tight end. So he's been a my guy for a long time. I thought he was a really fascinating prospect, and I think you look at him on film, and he's like a full-size dude now, and he blocks his ass off. So like a really interesting signing, and certainly a guy that's kind of on breakout watch here. Behind him, you have Davis Allen, Hunter Long, very similar types of prospects where they're not athletic, but relatively bigger, stronger-handed tight end prospects. Davis Allen has showed more than Hunter Long to this point, but I do think as tight ends 3 and 4, that's pretty good depth in some young players that are going to have to scratch and claw for playing time. And then you've got your running back room. Kyren Williams has actually not been as good of a receiving back as he projected as coming out of Notre Dame. I mean, he looked like a really polished receiving back, and honestly, his hands have just been really shaky. He dropped 13% of his targets last year, and that made him tied for 5th in the NFL for drops among running backs. And he ultimately only ended up with 206 yards on 47 targets. That's just really inefficient. Now, when he did catch the ball, showed a little bit of shake after the catch. I think he is a smart receiver in terms of working with Matthew Stafford in scramble drill, where if he stays in to block and then the play breaks down, he's able to kind of manage and understand, like, okay, I either need to stay in to block this guy, or I'm actually more useful, sneaking out as a dump down outlet. He's a smart guy. He just has some stuff to clean up. I think he could be much more of a factor in the receiving game. But then you got Blake Corum, where we can honestly save time talking about these running backs now and in the run game, because my pro comp on Blake Corum was Kyren Williams. He's a spitting image of him as a prospect. And that even applies in the receiving game, where he was okay when they targeted him, but was underproductive at Michigan. They don't really lean into these guys too much in the receiving game anyway, but they're just useful, if not dynamic, in the receiving game. Boston Scott, on the other hand, actually maybe could provide a little bit more explosiveness. Ronnie Rivers as well. They're more like real athletic scat back types. We'll see how much they want to use them. But that does round out your group of weapons. You're feeling pretty damn good about this group, but if they want to be an elite, dominant group, that is going to really pivot around what version of Cooper Kupp we get this year. But let's talk about the running backs as runners. And again, it was so predictable that they would like Blake Corum. I even said it in my top 10 running backs rankings video 2 months before the draft. Wouldn't be surprised if the Rams spend a 3rd-round pick as an eventual replacement to Kyren Williams so that they don't have to pay him, because his college film is literally the same guy. So just take that into consideration as we break these guys down in terms of their skill set, where they are both almost exactly the same size, about 5'8", 200 pounds. Neither are very fast. Neither are particularly powerful in the sense of just running through a linebacker. But both guys, great vision in the sense of Kyren Williams, I would say has elite NFL vision. He has some of the best patience and overall ability to see rushing lanes since Le'Veon Bell that I've seen. And you wonder how a 5'8", 195-pound running back with 4.6 speed is able to be towards the top of the league in rushing. It is because his vision is elite. but they do have some physical skills that help them. Both of these guys have above average contact balance, and that comes from being built low to the earth at 5'8", 5'9", and also just having very good play strength relative to their size. They might only be 195 pounds, but it is a very strong 195 or 200 pounds, 205 pounds. Corum is actually a little bit more built than Kyren Williams. But both guys have that sort of bowling ball of needles type of running style where, yeah, they might not necessarily run through you, but they might bounce off of you, tumble forward for 4, 5, 6 more yards. If they're lucky, there's no one around them after they bounce off of you and they're able to regain their balance and create an explosive run off of it. So in the scope of skill set, identical players. And now they are guaranteeing that one of these guys is on the football field. But I do still think they will lean into Kyren Williams. I mean, he was so impressive last year. I actually didn't expect to be all that impressed by Kyren Williams, but I was. I never thought, really, I would say he's something like a top 10 running back in the NFL. I think he's very much in that discussion. There are some physical limitations for sure, but he just brings something to the table that a lot of backs don't in terms of vision and scrappiness. And what's really unique with how the Rams do this, we haven't talked about the offensive line yet, but because they're running duo and they have the biggest interior offensive line in the league, when you're this small, and this applies to Kyren and now Blake Corum, when you're this small, guys just lose track of him. And even if he doesn't have the most power, because guys are a half a second late to react and to find him, they're not in as good of a position to make a tackle as they might be on a 5'11" or 6-foot running back where they can see them coming. He's like a stealth aircraft behind the offensive line. So he does have very unique assets to his game that other backs don't have that definitely compensate for a lack of physical traits. And you saw the exact same thing from Blake Corum at Michigan. So they've got a type, they've got a style, and it's going to be extremely effective. Even if some of the lack of dynamism is something you have to bring up with this running back room. But they get their dynamism through the air. They just want consistency and efficiency on the ground, and they will have that here. I have them ranked 13th to 14th with a B grade at running back, well above average there. The backups, you got Boston Scott, Ronnie Rivers, both undersized, kind of true scat back types. Boston Scott has been efficient running behind that Eagles offensive line. I do think he brings a little bit more of a jitterbug, human joystick type of running back to the picture. If they want some more dynamism, whether that's on outside zone or the screen game or what, at least someone to keep an eye on there. And then Zach Evans, if he could figure it out, that'd be great. He's a former 5-star SEC recruit, easily the most physically capable back in this room, but a testament to how much vision and skill does still matter at running back. Something I think even myself, I'm guilty of dismissing at times. They are, on the other hand, getting absolutely nothing from the quarterback in the run multiplier. Shouldn't be a surprise there, but they are obviously just fine with what they're getting from Stafford in the quarterback room otherwise. Let's talk about the offensive line. It's a good group. They came in ranked 11th to 13th for overall offensive line, but this is actually more of a run block oriented group. They come in 6th for run blocking with a B+ grade, but much lower, C+ grade, and 18th to 22nd for pass blocking. So let's go left to right. Your biggest question mark is at left tackle. I did think it was very fascinating that they kind of showed conviction in Alaric Jackson, an undrafted pickup 3 years ago, but an interesting undrafted player where he was a talented Iowa recruit. Very similar, actually, to kind of the story we talked about with Rasheed Walker for the Packers, where in your way too early mock drafts, this would have been someone that might have even showed up in the first rounds. But something got off the rails with him, and it's something I noticed seeing him in person at the Senior Bowl that year. He just looked way out of shape. A guy that had theoretical athletic background and wasn't even it's not even like he weighed in at 340 pounds. I think he weighed in at 295. But he just kind of didn't look like he hit the weight room, maybe? I don't know. There was something going on that led to him going undrafted, but the theoretical physical talent is there. And you see him now succeeding, getting better in the NFL, and you can understand why they might have the belief that he could be more than just a Band-Aid at left tackle. But it's a big year for him. He mostly held up at an average to above average level for 16 games last season. Much more in pass protection than as a run blocker. You would like to see some gains there. He's just, for a team that clearly values run blocking, he's a clear eyesore in that regard. Just, you still don't really see the athleticism and the ability to move guys off the ball, but I think as a weak link, they're at a point where they're okay with him at left tackle, quite clearly. Now, you do have Joseph Noteboom as well, who is still paid on a 3-year, $40 million contract here. They thought he was going to take that sort of Jordan Mailata type of leap when they paid him, and it went in the complete opposite direction. He's been awful. As a backup, you'd think he's okay, but he's their kind of other flyer at left tackle if the Alaric Jackson thing fails. But again, that's your question mark. The rest of this group is very solid. They pay Jonah Jackson in free agency. I mean, he was a great fit in Detroit, man. Good athlete, good play strength, dickhead mentality of a run blocker. Will be a very nice weapon on duo to create drive off the ball and be a good run blocker for them. And he's really good on the move, too, as a puller, good targeting system. Your questions on him do come in pass protection. He's just shown very incremental improvements in that regard. And still to this day, he's just a very average pass protector. But you think he's going to provide some stability there at left guard as they now move Steve Avila into center, which is interesting. He is now by far the biggest center in the NFL, 330 pounds. This is something that he has experience, at least at the Senior Bowl, took some snaps at center. I think he played a little center at TCU. Forgive me for not remembering that, but they clearly are more than comfortable with him sliding inside here. So I don't really have too many questions about if the guard to center transition is going to be there. It's more of just a question of can he weed out some of the inconsistencies that he showed on tape last year? He was mostly solid for a rookie guard, had a lot of high impact blocks where you could see that play strength. And he showed a lot of times, locking up good pass rushers in pass protection too. He's got a lot of traits. He's really strong. I don't think he's the most overall athletic guy, but I do think his foot speed left to right is fine enough for a 330-pound dude. And he's definitely going to give Matthew Stafford a step-up lane in the pocket because he just, his strength is his strength. He's not going to get pushed back against the bull rush. If you're going to beat him, it's going left to right, beating you with lateral quickness. And that's an area where, again, I just think we saw some inconsistencies from him in his rookie season. But overall, the arrow should be pointing up. He should be a really fun center to watch. And they clearly feel pretty good about him there. At right guard, you got Kevin Dotson. In many ways, a breakout season for him. But those paying attention knew he was good in Pittsburgh. He just never really got the recognition from the public, but also from his own team. They just, didn't want him. For such a smart organization, how they miscalculated Kevin Dotson is very bizarre. And what was strange about him coming to the Rams is that, PFF grades are not perfect, but over the course of his 3 years in Pittsburgh, he was a really good pass protector, but never graded out well as a run blocker. Last year, it flipped. He was very average in pass protection and great as a run blocker. I don't think that tells the whole story on who Kevin Dotson is as a football player, but I do think it was actually encouraging to see him kind of get unlocked as a run blocker. And I do think the grades backed up the tape. You did see him detonate linebackers, create drive off the ball more than he ever has. And he was perfect in this duo-heavy system, working on double teams, getting up to that second level, and as a puller when they wanted to run just traditional power. And they obviously ran a lot of duo, but they did mess around with pulling these guards, more so earlier in the season than later in the season, but he showed that he does have a good targeting system if you want to pull him and get him on the move a little bit more. So you do think the pass blocking grades, even if they were as low as they were last year, it's not like he was bad. He just had more losses than he had in years past. You would think that'll come back to average on his career a little bit more, and you're going to end up with man, like a top 10 guard in the NFL, and they paid him like that. They gave him a massive contract extension. The Steelers look like clowns for giving this guy up for nothing. A pair of day 3, like a 5th and a 6th round pick for Kevin Dotson. Crazy great trade by Les Snead. And then you got Rob Havenstein at right tackle. Vintage Wisconsin tackle. Size, strength, dickhead mentality, excellent run blocker. And then the pass blocking is pretty good, but not much you'd really write home about. He is getting up there in age, but had a really good year last year. I don't think you're expecting any regression there. That rounds out a really nice starting unit. In terms of the depth, we already talked about Joseph Noteboom. At tackle, you also have Warren McClendon, was, I want to say, a 5th round pick last year. Not a bad prospect. We'll see what his development looks like. You got Logan Bruce. They spent a 3rd round pick on him. Very quickly have kind of, in many ways, given up on him with all of the other investments they've made at interior offensive line. And someone I did kind of think was overdrafted a little bit. So I'm not going to say there's a ton of potential there, but does have that 3rd round draft pedigree. Bo Limmer, kind of the other story where I think he was underdrafted. There might be more like injury concerns on him. I don't know. He definitely had better tape than 6th round where he ended up going. I don't recall him testing all that well, which might have led to him falling too. But the Rams have shown like they just want the good football players. They don't care as much about testing numbers, and they've had a lot of success drafting that way. I mean, Bo Limmer, for a college too, Arkansas that has been cranking out centers. Frank Ragnow, Hjalte Froholt has turned into a player for the Cardinals, and Ricky Stromberg was a 3rd round pick for Washington last year. But there's a pedigree there, and I thought Bo was right up there ahead of, frankly, Stromberg and Froholt. So I'm definitely giving him a chance here. I think he was a really good pick. Definitely fits what they want to do. I think he can drive guys off the ball. They're obviously set at interior, but if someone goes down, would not be surprised if Bo is the first one in. And that could either be at center or Avila kicks back out to guard and Limmer steps in. But wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he becomes a starter for this team or someone else someday. Just the definition of someone that enjoys the position and blocks like they want to block. It sounds silly, but you just can't say that about every offensive lineman in the NFL. And then you're going to have kind of an open competition probably for a 10th spot, whether that's 7th round pick KT Leviston, Zach Thomas, AJ Arcuri, or even down the list there, Alec Lindstrom, Chris's brother. Really athletic offensive lineman. But it's going to be tough to crack those. And maybe Logan Bruce isn't guaranteed to make the team either. But yeah, it's decent depth. Nothing special, but solid. You do, for this team, have to talk as well about the run blocking skill players. You know, there's a massive group in the middle of the league that just don't get any percentage boost in the run game from me for this series that we just kind of don't talk about. But there are a handful of teams that do get a legitimate impact from their skill players in the run blocking, and the Rams are one of them. They ranked 2nd to 6th among teams for this, and I think we've already analyzed how they use these guys as that big slot wide receiver, but I mean, Puka Nacua and a healthy Cooper Kupp is the best blocking wide receiver duo in the league, and both Higbee and Parkinson are like fine as blocking tight ends. Even Demarcus Robinson blocks his ass off on the perimeter, so the O-line alone would put them in a tier 6th through 10th, but the skill block multiplier leaves them alone at 6th, ahead of those other 5 teams. They really do get a legitimate bump above those teams, and you feel it watching this team play. They depend on that aspect, but it works. So that rounds out the offense, but where do they rank in terms of overall offense for the league? They come in as my 5th ranked offense for this season. And that could easily go up if Cooper Kupp is back to 100%. And it could also go up if some of these younger pass protectors like Alaric Jackson and Steve Avila continue to get better as well. Because those are kind of the only questions on what is otherwise a super complete offense. The coaching, the quarterback, the weaponry, the running backs, the run blocking, it's all there, man. This is just a great two-way offense that is going to be a thrill this season, and certainly going to be the core reason why the Rams should be in the mix in the playoffs. Now, as we transition to this defense, just as a little prelude here, they're going to be working against this side of the ball, the offense is. And I'll just show it now. The Rams rank 31st for me on defense. So, needless to say, if you're playing underdog fantasy or your home leagues, whatever it is, get yourself some LA Rams and get your Rams in your daily lineups as well, because this group is going to have to score, barring incredible growth from this defense, 27 to 30 points a week. I think they're capable of it. But needless to say, I have my questions about this defense, and that honestly centers around this defensive line. They rank out near the bottom for defensive line, 29th to 30th. A little bit better in pass rush, 25th to 29th with a C grade, but 27th to 31st for D-line run defense and a C- grade, and that D-line overall grade as well was a C-. Man, they are going to miss Aaron Donald this year, in my opinion. And I will just say, if you're a Rams fan that says, oh, Kobe Turner was awesome, Byron Young had 50 pressures and 8 sacks or whatever in his rookie season, they're going to be just fine. I cannot stress enough how much the Aaron Donald effect contributed to those guys' production. And I'm not saying Kobe Turner especially isn't a good player. I think he is. Byron Young, on the other hand, I'm going to make an argument that a lot of his production was cleanup work, often off the heels of Aaron Donald, or a guy that benefited off the blitz when they knew teams were going to slide towards Aaron Donald. But when you have a player that every single snap is like the devil on the shoulder of the opposing offensive line, knowing that they have to double team him, sometimes triple team him, and that every single slide is going to go that way, not only does it guarantee one-on-one looks for everybody, but it allows them to line up in a certain way that is going to make everybody's job in an advantageous position. The amount of times I saw Kobe Turner line up as an outside shade, knowing that he was going to get the advantage from a leverage department based on how the offensive line was going to slide, was eye-opening. And the amount of times they're able to create open blitz looks because they know which direction the team is going to slide from was like every other third down. And that's before you even talk about the actual pressure that Aaron Donald was able to generate. I don't want to undersell this. And it's easy to be optimistic about a Rams team that has earned so much benefit of the doubt. But this is a big, big deal. And if they miss the playoffs, I'm going to go on a limb and say it's because of the difference between having Aaron Donald and not having Aaron Donald, and them just not being able to make up for it on the defensive side of the ball. But let's talk about these players. There is potential here. And while I'm betting against this group, I'm not going to rule out that this can be an okay enough group for this to be a salvageable defense that is enough to complement this offense and still make the Rams really good. But don't expect this to be a game-wrecking group. I do want to start with Kobe Turner, because while I think he benefited from the Aaron Donald effect, I do think he's by far their best player, and he was really good as a rookie. Came into the league as a 6th-round pick, someone that transferred from a very low level of competition, went to Wake Forest, and even at Wake Forest, he wasn't like a full-time player. But his snap-in, snap-out efficiency, you saw a game-wrecking player. And I was just too low on him. I missed on Kobe Turner. The Rams hit. But I see the tape. I see the skills. He's a dude. He's a legit, 2B caliber player already, and maybe he can be more than that. I don't know. We'll see this year. The way I'm kind of looking at what he's going to give them is through the lens of what he did last year, which were, frankly, defensive rookie of the year type of numbers. 50 pressures, 12 sacks, at least PFF sacks, which are different than the normal stats. I don't know what his normal sack stats were. I don't really care. I'm not a big sack stat guy. But a really good rookie season. I think you turn that down based on what we said about the Aaron Donald effect. Kobe Turner will see a lot more double teams now. You're not going to be able to line him up as a shade knowing he's going to get that outside shoulder or that inside shoulder because of where the team's going to slide. So I do think that production will come down, but I think it'll come back up because it's year 2. And he's learning his game. He's getting better. He's developing as a young player. So I think you can plug that in. He's a good piece. Count on hopefully 45, 50 pressures, 8 sacks. It's a nice player. It's not a number one, but it's a nice player. And even though he's undersized, I want to give him credit for what he does against the run too, especially with how they use him as a 3-tech. They don't ask him to 2-gap, take on a lot of double teams in that way. He can get off blocks and has some good instincts to do some stuff against the run. Inevitably, he will face some double teams, and when that happens at 290 pounds, he's going to go backwards. It's just something they live with the way they build this front. Ultimately, he's not really my question here. It's kind of everything else. I want to kick things outside to who I think will be their number 2 in Jared Verse. Really nice, high-floor pass rushing prospect. Love his size, love his first step, love his power, love his energy. And I like how he's a power rusher that also wins with swipes. He doesn't have the craziest bend or a spin move or this wide variety of pass rush moves. He's more of a no-nonsense north and south rusher, which in general is a style I like. But you do need to have other ways to win, and he will put the fear of that bull rush into you, but then he has just nice foot quickness to change lanes, rip through an arm, and mix things up from the bull rush. I think he's going to be a good rookie pass rusher, which is 40-something pressures, maybe 7 or 8 sacks. He's a nice high floor pick. I don't know if he's going to step in and be a dominant player. I'm not going to completely rule it out, but it's just a lot to ask of him, right? Honestly, the main knock I had on Jared Verse, outside of elite bend, elite traits to be like that elite pass rusher, basically, I think ultimately he's going to cap out something like a high-end number 2, maybe a Zadarius Smith, for example, if you want a ballpark skill level comparison. But the biggest knock on him, honestly, was the run defense, because he has all the traits to defend the run, but he really lacked instincts in that department. Something that could easily be coached up, but I don't know if that's going to be there in his rookie season. There's no other way to put it, but guys would just run past his lane. He would be in a good position to make a play, but he wouldn't make those plays. So I don't know if it's a processing issue, a coaching issue, what the deal was, but just wasn't the run defender you would expect. There are highlight plays against the run for sure, where he can blow you up, make some big plays in the backfield, but on a down-to-down basis, he would give up his gap quite a lot against the run. But overall, a good pick. He'll be a nice player. I'm expecting maybe average number 2 impact from him. But obviously, if that's your best edge rusher and you're comparing this to the rest of the league, that puts them in a pretty bad spot in terms of edge play. I think the next guy we got to talk about is the other edge rusher, Byron Young. This is a guy I'm worried about. Not in the sense of he's a bad player or anything close to that. I'm worried that people are going to look at the production, say it was year 1, the arrow's only pointing up on him, and he's going to be a legit piece for this D-line. I'm not sold, man. I was not impressed by the tape. I think, to me, he was the definition of production by design and production by playtime. I kid you not, he was 5th in the NFL in snaps played among edge rushers. And we talk about that 10% pressure rate being the baseline for someone that should be a number 3 edge, someone that rotates off the bench. You want that guy to at least get you a 10% pressure rate. He was exactly there. 499 pass rush snaps, 50 pressures. So it's not that he sucks, but as a starter, he's giving you as low efficiency as you can get. He was also 86th in pass rush win rate, which is right in line with what I'm saying, where, okay, that's a backup, first guy off the bench type of dude. Not someone that should be 4th in the NFL in snaps played at edge. And then you add on top of that the fact that I do think he benefited from Aaron Donald flushing dudes out of the pocket, demanding that the line slide a certain way. I think his pass rush productivity was even higher than it could have been based on the film. Now, of course, there's a side of this where, okay, he's got a lot of athleticism. He's in year 2, and he is relatively new to football. He had this really cool backstory, and I'm pulling for him. I think it's a really cool thing where he was out of football. He was working at a dollar store, saw a tryout for Tennessee Military Academy or something, went and balled out there, ended up going to the SEC, and ends up being a 3rd-round draft pick. He's new to high-level competition and all this stuff. And there is a side of it where it's like, okay, yeah, well, maybe something does click in terms of pass rush skills and all this stuff. But the counterpoint to that is he's going to be 27 by the end of his second season here. And when you watch him play, he is an entirely raw pass rusher. All of his wins essentially are coming from his athleticism, his speed, his get off, his pursuit, his effort. I don't want to just dismiss the fact that he wants it. Like he is a high effort dude. It's just he doesn't know what he's doing as a pass rusher. And even as a run defender, he's still figuring a lot of stuff out. So I actually don't put the up arrow on Byron Young. I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of what he is. He's an athletic, high effort dude that I think could be a good piece as a number 3 off the bench, as a spark plug that brings it. And maybe that does make me a hater to say that I just don't expect a whole lot of growth in his game. But I am kind of betting against it for one reason or another. I would love to be wrong about that. But obviously for that to be your next best pass rusher after you've already gone through this, and Kobe Turner's a nice player, but not a number 1 guy. Jared Verse, a nice first-round pick, but you don't know what you're getting from him. For him to be the next guy, it's like, man, this is starting to be a little bit of a concern here. Enter Braden Fisk. And I said it off the bat, I've got takes on Braden Fisk. And I'm proud to be a guy that, like, when I see something that's against the grain, I don't just succumb to the consensus opinion on him. But the reality is I am very against consensus on Braden Fisk. I had a 3rd to a 4th round grade on him. I thought this was one of the worst moves in the draft, if not the worst move, for the Rams to take their 2nd round pick in this upcoming draft to trade up to guarantee that they had to get Braden Fisk was mind-blowing to me based on what I saw from him in college. And again, I recognize I'm against consensus. I think he's a fun player. I'm rooting for him. I want to be wrong about this. I'm just telling you what I saw. I saw a guy who, yes, tested extremely well, and yes, has an excellent first step on tape. But a guy that, as a 24-year-old prospect, was not a productive player in college. For as athletic as he wasn't hyper-productive at Western Michigan, where he came from. And at Florida State, he had 1 good game. Now, it was his last game against Louisville, and that's great. But 6 years of college, this dude basically was not an impact. And his skill set, he's undersized, right? 6'3" and 293 pounds, but especially the arm length. 31-inch arms is something like 3rd percentile for defensive tackles. So he's light, but he also just doesn't get his hands on guys consistently at all. And his play style is entirely predicated on his lightning quick first step, which is nice. It's what's giving him a chance here. But he is all about trying to either cross your face or shoot a gap. And because he has short arms, he's basically just doing this and trying to get past you. And I came off as a huge hater when I compared him to Magic Carp because I said his only move is flail, where all he can do is flail around, hope he can get past you. 1 out of 10 snaps, he's Gyarados, and he explodes into the backfield and destroys a play. And those plays are fun. But the other 9 plays, he's just not accomplishing much. Even if it's a high-effort play that looks explosive, it's not actually doing anything. And against the run, I'm especially worried, man. Defending the run as a defensive tackle is all about stack, peek, shed, engage. Braden Fisk is all about just shooting gaps, knifing into the backfield, being a penetrator. He can do that. And you will get, again, maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 run plays. He's disruptive, and he's either guessing right and or the defense is guessing right, or the running back runs right into him, and he's the guy that makes the play in the backfield. Or he gets in the way, opens up an opportunity where the running back has to change lanes and someone else makes a play. Again, there are high-end plays. You can make a highlight reel on Braden Fisk that's incredible. But the other 4 or 5 plays, all he's doing is just abandoning that gap. And you now have this gaping hole vacated by Braden Fisk. It is an incredibly boom or bust play style that I think if you bringing him off the bench as this high effort boom or bust product, and you're going to say, all right, you're a bench player, we're either getting an elite play from you 1 out of 5 times, or you're going to cost us. I think that's fine. And that's why I had him as a 3rd to a 4th round pick. But when you're taking him in the second round to be a legitimate impact and a part of what you're hoping to replace Aaron Donald, that's a huge concern for me. And frankly, with his play style, I just don't really see how he becomes much more than what I've described so far. I think he knows how he wins. He plays the way he plays, but I don't see a drastic change from that or him developing some great bull rush or a push-pull swim move or a bunch of other ways to win as a rusher other than how he does currently. And the run defense, I'm just straight worried about. Now, I'm just telling you what I saw and what I'm worried about. I'm excited to see how this ages, but again, I really hope I'm wrong because they need him to be good after losing Aaron Donald. I will say this. When the Rams took him, I said that's about as good of a fit as you could ask for because they, as much as anybody in the league, love these tweener type of dudes that play that 4-eye spot where they are just penetrators. And they kind of craft this system around it. So that gives him a better chance to succeed within this system than if someone just drafted him to play 3-tech in a 4-2 front all the time. You know, that's not exactly how they're going to use Braden Fisk. So I do understand what they saw in the skill set, the role they're projecting him to, but that's, Jonah Williams' role, Marquise Copeland's role, not Aaron Donald's role. You know what I'm saying? Not someone you're spending 2 second-round picks for. It's a take. It's one of my bigger draft takes I had this year. It's going to be very interesting to follow. But needless to say, I just don't see him being a full-scope major impact for this team now and even into the future. In fact, I would argue the bigger wild card that they need to count on this year, based on how I feel about Braden Fisk, is actually Bobby Brown. In Bobby Brown, I see the only real defensive tackle, or at least nose tackle, on this roster. Kobe Turner is 285 pounds. Braden Fisk is 290 pounds. Tyler Davis is undersized. Laryl Murchison, Dejuan Johnson are tweener end types. Their run defense is almost entirely dependent on Bobby Brown staying healthy, which he's struggled to do, but also continuing to get better. And I think it's a decent bet to make. I actually like Bobby Brown. I think he's going to have a bit of a breakout year for the Rams this year. I think when he's played, which again, he's missed a lot of time, but when he's played, he's actually shown really good growth in the run defense department. And even as a pass rusher, he can create a little push and do some stuff. He just hasn't really had enough time to develop that skill set. But I do think there's a little bit more in him. When he got drafted, the analysis on him was like, okay, this dude looks the part. He looks like Kenny Clark. He just looks and feels and moves and is as strong as you would expect an NFL defensive tackle to be. It's just a matter of him putting it all together. And I do think that the IQ and the development and the work ethic is there. It's just a matter of proving it and staying healthy. Not saying he's going to be Kenny Clark, but can he be, I don't know, Dalvin Tomlinson maybe? Or what Michael Brockers was for this team for a long time? I think so. A really good run defender and an adequate pass rusher. Sure. But has to prove it. And then your last kind of starter here is Michael Hoyt. He, like Byron Young, was top 10 in the NFL in snaps played last year. And he's an okay player. He's a really unique dude where he's built like a defensive tackle, but they play him as a stand-up edge. They drop him into coverage. Because he's so big, he inevitably defends the run pretty well off the edge. And honestly, as a pass rusher, he is athletic. He's big. He's got a cross chop that works for him. He has his wins as a pass rusher. I actually think on a snap-by-snap basis, he's as good, if not a little better, than Byron Young. But, he'll be every bit as much, I think, in this rotation as Byron Young. It's just people are going to gravitate towards Byron Young trying to take a leap next year because of the youth, the athleticism, and the draft pedigree. But, he's a fine player. He's not much of an impact player, but he's useful. And then, honestly, the next guy I want to mention is Ernest Jones. We don't do this for every team, but when you have a linebacker that gets you 37 pressures and 6 sacks and a PFF pass rush grade of 83.1 on 141 blitzing snaps, you're a part of the pass rush, whether you like it or not. And he is. He's one of the better blitzing linebackers in the league. That only counts for so much, and most linebackers are at least somewhat good at blitzing, but when there's guys that are notably good at it, it's worth mentioning. And when teams really use those guys a lot, it's worth mentioning. But then, you go through the depth, there's just not a ton to say. Brennan Jackson's a 5th-round rookie this year. He's got some power. He's an interesting player. I think he could be a rotational option for them down the road. Nick Hampton, kind of a tweener linebacker type out of App State, could eventually carve out an early down role as a 3-4 outside backer. Kyer Thomas, Zach Van Valkenburg, say that 3 times fast, and Ochuan Mathis are all going to be vying for snaps. Nothing you're really excited about there. I will say the difference between them being a C grade and C minus D-line run defense grade is the depth on the interior. I mean, Laryl Murchison and Dejuan Johnson as your primary defensive tackle depth. And I know we listed 3 interior starters, but they do play a lot of that 5-1 penny front and 3-4 base where those 3 guys are all out there. So these are essentially your backups. I mean, both these guys are like okay tweener defensive end types as deep backups, but God, dude, you've got nothing off the bench in terms of run defense, especially. And if Bobby Brown goes down, this team is kind of screwed. They would have to go out and sign somebody if Bobby Brown went down. And maybe an Ndamukong Suh or Linval Joseph or whoever that type of guy might be is their insurance policy, if you will. But this group as is tough to look at. And then Tyler Davis, a 6th-round pick out of Clemson. Honestly, he was really similar to Braden Fisk, where he's a little undersized and he has tiny arms, really high effort dude, quick athleticism, but just really no consistent way that he's able to win or hold up against the run. There's a lot of similarities there. They like to typecast players and draft off of those archetypes. There was a lot of Braden Fisk in Tyler Davis's tape. So I see what they like, can apply a lot of the same thinking, though, to what we said about Tyler Davis. And then you got Corey Durden, who does have a little bit of size. I don't know if they count on him as the Bobby Brown backup, but we've barely seen anything from him. Among 3 other kind of undrafted rookies getting in the mix here. But yeah, there's your D-line. I've got worries about it, man. I really do. And I think there's a lot of pennants out there maybe even underrating the impact that losing Aaron Donald on this team is going to have. But let's talk about the linebackers, or in the case of the Rams, it's really just linebacker. The Rams, this actually goes all the way back to the Patriots deep dive when we talked about that 5-1 penny front type of defense, which I did say the Patriots are very unique in using that front. I think the way they use it is unique because their third safety is a nickel corner and a dime linebacker all in one. The Rams don't really do that with that big safety that complements the fact that you only have one linebacker on the field and can be your second linebacker in a lot of looks. But in terms of the actual front, the Rams did run a lot of 5-1. And Christian Roseboom in 18 games only played 579 snaps. That means as their LB2, really for the majority of the season, he only played 48% of their snaps. So that means he's either coming off the field for a dime package in passing downs, or even in their base nickel, it is a 5-1 front where it's just Ernest Jones out there. Now, that's not entirely saying that LB2 is only on the field 50% of the time. A lot of those missing snaps were Troy Reeder, who played another 198 snaps. So you're probably talking 65% of the time or so that their second linebacker is on the football field. So the impact of the LB2 on this team is diminished a little bit. But we'll get to Roseboom. Let's obviously talk about Ernest Jones. I mean, how often do we see this story? And it's just another case study for why the 3rd, 4th round is where you should be investing in your linebackers. Get these dudes that are good athletes, maybe not great athletes, not a Quay Walker or a Devin White or Jamin Davis, but guys that aren't gifted those starting opportunities because they were 1st-round picks, guys that will come in a veteran room, have to, learn how to work, prove that they can work, and through that, actually understand this impossible position to play that is linebacker. And that's what we're seeing from Ernest Jones, especially in terms of run defense, where his ability to get through his keys, get to a gap, maintain gap discipline while also making plays in the backfield, showing the size and physicality to thump a little bit, take on guards, playing a lot of these 5-1 fronts where he's the only dude at the second level and still has to be good back there and be a consistent tackler all at the same time. He's been awesome in that phase. We already talked about what he does as a blitzer as well. And in a contract year, the arrow is only pointing up on him. The Rams have yet to commit on paying him. We'll see which direction they want to go there. I think they will pay him because they, as we'll see, have invested in no backup plan here. But I do think the last leg of his development that we will want to see a little bit this year is going to be in coverage. You just don't really see a ton from him in coverage. The occasional pass breakup, I'm not going to go as far as saying he's a liability, but he has been a guy that teams have been able to attack, and he's not some crazy playmaker back there. So you want to see a little bit more in that department, but plenty of reason to believe that can come. I think he has enough athletic ability out in space to do a little bit more there. But he's definitely one of the ascending stars on this football team and just might be poised for a monster, like Pro Bowl type of season. Really like Ernest Jones. But the problem is they got nobody next to him. And even if it's nice that he can be out there in a 5-1 front and they, are able to neutralize having a really bad LB2 at times by running those systems, it's not like they were great defending the run last year, period. So even if they do some nice schematic stuff to work around the lack of roster talent here, it is limiting in many ways. And, Christian Roseboom's just a fine backup, high effort, undrafted type that has done a valiant job to, make a team and in many ways become a starter on an NFL team. Sometimes things will click and he makes a big play in the backfield, but there's just been no consistency from him. A bazillion missed tackles, really nothing in the terms of coverage. It's commendable that he's in the spot that he's in, but you're not really projecting some big growth from him. It's possible, but certainly not expected. And he is, if you're being realistic about it, probably the worst LB2 in the league. And yes, the impact of that is neutralized slightly, but this guy's still going to be out there 65, 70% of the time, or Troy Reeder, which they did just kind of rotate these guys, let them sort through it. By the end of the year, it was more or less, 20, 25 snaps for Roseboom, 15 to 20 snaps for Reeder. Very well might be the same case, and, it makes sense. Both those guys get 67 overall grades for me. Roseboom a little bit better in run defense, Reeder a little bit more coverage feel, and I have to really break down the splits, but I would imagine Roseboom probably leaned more towards early downs, Reeder more towards later downs. That would make sense to me. Lean into these guys' relative strengths a little bit, but overall you're getting essentially a backup level linebacker as your LB2. And that's just, it's going to drag you down a little bit. And then the rest of your depth, really nothing proven or anything that pops to me at all. It's a bizarrely thin linebacking group, and definitely not a group that could handle any sort of injury to Ernest Jones. Severe drop-off there. So in terms of the overall ranking for this linebacking group, it's a unique group to analyze because of how they use these guys, but they came in with a C+ overall grade, 24th to 25th at linebacker. The coverage is quite low, 27th to 30th in terms of coverage, but much better in linebacker run defense, 12th to 20th in that B- tier of just like solid to good groups. And that's the case here, even if it's polarizing, where you have one great dude against the run and one abysmal linebacker against the run between Roseboom and Reeder. So it does kind of make sense where they come in right in the middle. But let's get to the secondary. I do think this is the overall best unit on this defense, and certainly the highest upside unit when we get to Tre'Davious White and the potential if he could be his old self. But they come in with a C+ grade here, 19th to 23rd in the league. Again, their highest ranking group on the defense. But I want to start with Darius Williams. One of my favorite overall acquisitions this offseason. One, because it's just a great signing for the Rams, but also because it was just entirely predictable. I believe I tweeted the second the Jags released him that this is great news for the LA Rams or something like that. I don't know. X is going to shit. Their search engine has not been working. I tried to find the tweet, but something along the lines of how predictable it was going to be that he's going to rejoin the Rams, and didn't take much time. He's back. And right back in essentially the same system that he's built to play. In these off-zone systems, your outside corners in many ways are an extension of your safety group, where they're playing 8 to 12 yards off, and you're looking for guys that aren't necessarily the most physical athletes to get in guys' face or the best speed to play bump and run and hang with guys all over the field. You're looking for guys with high IQ, high zone IQ that can read the quarterback's eyes, high anticipation, and really good agility and acceleration and hip fluidity. You don't necessarily need the long speed, but you need speed in 5 to 6 yard areas. Where if you're going to play them off, yes, you're inviting those underneath throws, but preferably you have guys that can anticipate outs, in breakers, digs, slants, and jump that shit, which requires the mental anticipation and the quick twitch, acceleration, and agility to get there. The long speed doesn't quite as much matter. But also, if you're going to have some of that aggressiveness, you also need to be able to turn your hips and accelerate quickly while flat-footed so you don't also get burnt over the top. And that all is literally Darius Williams in a nutshell. He has actually become like a pro comp that I use for some of these off-zone, undersized, quick-twitch, high IQ corners in college football. He very much is the archetype that you're looking for in this system. So, needless to say, it's a great signing. Much needed signing. I mean, this secondary was brutal last year. There's a reason there's not a lot of returning pieces here. And, definitely the biggest overall upgrade that this defense made in an effort to try and make up for the loss of Aaron Donald. You should be getting more interceptions, more pass breakups, more stops when you're playing this type of system from Darius Williams. And then, honestly, we can apply that same exact archetype build to Tre'Davious White, who in his prime did all those things at the absolute elitist of levels for that archetype of corner. He was an all-pro in a quarters-heavy system in Buffalo. I think you get the point in terms of skill set. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but elite IQ, elite agility, and short area juice and ball skills. And White even has a little bit more man-to-man skills than Darius Williams. But this is much more about who the hell is Tre'Davious White nowadays. It has been 3 years, 3 seasons since we saw Tre'Davious White play at a kind of all-pro level. And his snap count has only gone down year by year. 630 snaps in 2021. 440 snaps in 2022. And last year, only 189 snaps. And in 2022, specifically, as those injuries were starting to stack up, he actually just wasn't even that good. He had the worst year of his career. Also turns 30 years old this year, by the way. So to think that all-pro Tre'Davious White is even still in there is a 3% range of outcomes. I'm not going to just entirely write it off, but that's just not reasonable to expect that. But could you get something close to like Darius Williams and have two of these guys as perfect scheme fits in this defense? One guy on the left, one guy on the right, luck into him being healthy and getting somewhat back to form. I mean, yeah, that's why he got $8 million. But he also got $8 million because the league knows there's a huge injury risk and he just hasn't been that dude on the field for a long time now. He was a really nice dart throw for the Rams to make, but that's what he is. He's a dart throw, and it just adds a ton of volatility to this secondary and this defense as a whole. Because in the likely scenario that he misses time, you are committing to Trey White in terms of starter money, which is going to hurt your depth a little bit. Not that I don't like Kobe Durant, but they're electing to go with the risky Tre'Davious White instead of perhaps a more reliable option like maybe, Dane Jackson, even like a Stephon Gilmore who's still out there. Someone that's just had more availability, but the best case scenario isn't as good as what might be the best case scenario on Trey White. It's just a risk that they're taking. It's been a risk forward front office for a long time. So it's not a surprise that they signed him given the scheme fit and the mentality of this team where injuries just don't scare them too much. But, look what happened in 2022. That was a worst case scenario. Either way, it's going to be fun to find out. But in the event that White's not there, Kobe Durant steps in. And I like Kobe Durant. My pro comp on him was Darius Williams. As we mentioned, we've been using that Darius Williams comps and some guys like this. Very much fits the mold of everything we've talked about. And he even has a little bit more speed in there, but he is undersized. He's played some in the slot. He's just not good in the slot. He's not a good tackler. He's not a good run defender. He's better out on the perimeter. Still a little bit more unproven, but, if he's got to step out there, they can live with it, but he does not have the consistency in terms of the risk management, the zone IQ. The overall coverage ability for him has just been much more up and down than a guy like Darius Williams. Beyond that, Darion Kendrick goes down with the ACL. I don't think Rams fans are going to miss him too much. By far the slowest corner that was starting in the league last year. But they did sign Jerry Jacobs. Gives them a little bit more of a physical presence if they need to guard a bigger wide receiver or want to play press on somebody. He's not consistent in that role, but does give them a little bit more of something they don't have. Trey Tomlinson, yet another one of these undersized dudes. Severely undersized in his case. He's like 5'7", 175 pounds. I was not a big Trey Tomlinson guy. He hasn't showed much in the league to this point. But I am actually excited about Quentin Lake in the slot. Quentin Lake was a total my guy in that draft. I loved his IQ, his anticipation, his ball skills, his hip fluidity and acceleration. There's a lot to like in his tape as a safety at UCLA. And the Rams within the system have realized that slot corner doesn't need to be that hyper quick, typical slot wide receiver that needs to man up these tiny slot wide receivers. The league has changed. I mean, a lot of people are putting tight ends and big slots into the slot. So the idea that you need Nickel Roby-Coleman, someone Rams fans will remember, the idea that you need that type as your slot corner is dead and gone. In fact, in many ways, if you're going to live in nickel, if you have a slot corner with safety experience or that is a safety, in the case of like Kyle Hamilton, for example, you're actually getting back a lot of run support from that slot corner. And in Quentin Lake's case, very high effort, secure tackling type of slot corner. But I also think in a more off-zone forward system, his coverage skills really translate well. In a 5 to 10 area, he's got plenty of juice. He can open up left or right, really quick feet, high anticipation, can defend two-way goes, good ball skills. Maybe I'm biased because he was a huge my guy in that draft, but he was a my guy in that draft because I liked his tape at UCLA. Coach's son type with plenty of physical tools to make it. So I really like Quentin Lake. I think he's a potential breakout player, at least in the sense of he establishes himself as a good starting slot corner. Honestly, there's a lot of Brian Branch in his game. Not quite as good, but you could see a little bit of that. So I'm excited for him, and I hope he stays healthy because they don't really have a true slot guy other than him, at least in that type of role. Then you're talking about, okay, Kobe Durant steps back into the slot or Darius Williams does that. It's just not quite as ideal. But I think they're excited for him in this role. But then you got your true safeties. So Cam Curl is definitely the starter. They gave him a decent 2-year, $9 million contract. I talked about it in the offseason section. Very similar to Jordan Fuller. Smart dude on the back end. Not a ton of range or athleticism or anything like that, but a secure tackler coming downfield. I mean, Rams fans are very familiar with that skill set. He can find himself out of position in coverage just because he struggles to get there consistently, but a nice player, a nice signing, gives you a decent floor back there. And then John Johnson ended up kind of securing this number 2 safety starting job. They thought it was going to be Russ Yeast. Surprise, surprise. It's not Russ Yeast. John Johnson kind of comes back and takes that job. And by the looks of it, he's going to hold off Russ Yeast for now. He's just fine. Really smart player. Physical dude. But entirely limited physically, and it just shows up all over the place. Whether he's late to get there in coverage, trying to man guys up and can't hang, or even as a tackler, he's just been kind of week to week, year to year. Tackling a lot of times is about just being a better athlete than the guy you're going against, and a lot of times he struggles to stay in front or get in front of tacklers. So he's fine. He's a smart player. They don't depend on speed on the back end here, and he doesn't bring that, but he brings communication and floor. But they are hoping to maybe get a little bit more upside here in the third round in Cameron Kinchins. And boy, it would be fun to have a double Cameron safety duo with Cameron Curl and Cameron Kinchins. But he was just a very polarizing safety prospect. Explosive plays left and right. A lot of range. I don't think he ended up running all that well off the top of my head, but he does have good play speed. He didn't end up running all that well. Ran a 4.65 in Indy and a 4.60 at his pro day, but a lot of play speed. And the Rams have had so much success counting on the tape and the GPS tracking. And you see from Kinchins, he has range as a free safety. He can get sideline to sideline. He can explode downfield and light dudes up. He loves to hit. But very much a risk taker on the back end. Blows a lot of coverages. Just as many big plays as he made on the back end, he blew coverages as well, taking risks. Got to find a nice balance there to play at the NFL level. And as a tackler, just dips his head, missed a ton of tackles, got to clean that stuff up. So I don't think he's ready, but I like the risk, and I could totally see, even within this season, if they like what they're getting from him in practice, maybe make the change for a week or two and just see if you get a little bit more juice back there than a John Johnson. And then if things go well, you run with it. If he blows a bunch of plays and doesn't look the part, you go back to John Johnson. It's an option they have. Beyond him, you do still have Russ Yeast. They know what they kind of have in him at this point, and it's not great. Jason Taylor, also an athletic 5th-round pick last year. Very much still in development out of Oklahoma State, but has some traits. Could surprise, I guess. I don't know, man. It's a fun secondary. I can't rank them out too high just because we don't know what you got in Trey White. Quentin Lake is still pretty unproven, though I like him. And you're just kind of limited on the back end. But it is definitely better than what they had last year. And if some of those guys surprise, this could be more of a top half secondary in the league. And that would probably be, as we kind of wrap this up with their defense, that would probably be their best path to like genuinely making up for losing Aaron Donald. I'm just betting against this D-line being able to do that. But could their improvements in the secondary get to the point where they're, okay, maybe not all the way to what they had with Aaron Donald, but at least a useful, serviceable defense that can be good enough to complement one of the best offenses in the league? I think that's probably your biggest hope, with the D-line being kind of plan B there. But again, I already mentioned it. My 31st ranked defense. I do not like this group as a whole. I think they are porous. I don't think anybody's going to get off the bus afraid of that defensive line. And just the way they play coverage on the back end, even if I like some of their pieces, I think you'd be able to run the ball in this group. They rank 28th for run defense. I think you can drop back and pass on this group. Maybe not for a bunch of explosive plays necessarily, because that's their overall style, is to just play top down. But I think you could totally pick these guys apart underneath, get plenty of time to throw as well, where you do get a little bit more explosiveness in scramble drill maybe. But 31st in pass defense, obviously all making them a very split team in terms of offense and defense. But what about special teams? Oh, man, it's not great there either. It's not a huge deal, but you got major questions here. We talked about it off the bat, but they missed a ton of kicks last year. And beyond that, their PFF and DVOA team grades for their special teams were horrible. 31st in PFF, 32nd per DVOA. For what it's worth, their rookie punter, Ethan Evans, did play well. And PFF did like Joshua Carty. He graded out really well at Stanford. That's the extent of my kicker analysis on rookie kickers. One thing I do know is you can never trust a rookie kicker. It's just going to be determined. It's not that they can't hit, but you certainly can't trust that they will. So they rank as my 29th overall special teams, and is another area of this team that they're going to have to either fix or work against, as they did last year, which, as we round out the team, makes them even more of a polarizing group where this is going to be about the offense. But even though their defense does not rank out well, the special teams do not rank out well, even as I rank these teams at their floor with a potentially hindered Cooper Kupp and not projecting growth on the offensive line necessarily, they still rank out 5th offensively in terms of at their floor, and as my 12th overall team, very much in the playoff picture. But as we look at this team's strengths, weaknesses, pivotal factors, our Venn diagram here, and specifically at their wild cards that could decide the overall success of this team, if they can get a healthy Cooper Kupp, this offense should be top 3, not just top 5. And if they can get like Trey White healthy, back to something like his old self, and the new defensive coordinator, Chris Shula, proves to be worth his cheddar, lives up to that last name, and I don't think this defense has crazy upside, but if they could just be the 22nd best defense, this team is absolutely in business as real players in the NFC. I don't think the best version of this Rams team is the best team in the NFC, but certainly a team that could beat anybody and even go as far as Super Bowl. But the final question here, as we look at their schedule, is that something I would bet on? Well, yes and no. While I felt like I was low on this Rams team, and I still have my doubts, especially about that defensive line minus Aaron Donald, Vegas appears to be even lower on the Rams than I am. Their over-under is only 8.5 wins, and their Super Bowl odds are 30-1. Like I said, I feel like I'm low on the Rams, but if I can get past just my pure, unadulterated hatred for Braden Fisk aside for a second and be honest about, could this team get through the NFC playoffs and beat the Chiefs, beat the Ravens, beat whoever they end up playing in a single game in the Super Bowl? And if they do that, I get 30-1 odds? I mean, compared to the Packers, who are 18-1, or even the Falcons at 28-1 are higher than the Rams. The Falcons have just as many defensive questions as the Rams do, and the Rams' offense is better. So I thought I was low on this Rams team, but yeah, I might take a little Rams Super Bowl action. $10 to win 300 on Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford going on a run? Sure. You're not going to be able to get 30-1 odds in December, I'll tell you that. But their schedule is tough. I will say that. Their division's tough. They drew the NFC North and the AFC East. So probably the best division in the NFC and the second best division in the AFC. And their own division is probably the second best in the NFC. They do still have some easier games in there, though, that they're going to have to capitalize on. They got the Raiders, they got the Saints, they got the Patriots. So maybe that evens it out a little bit. But ultimately, man, my projection has them at 9.1 wins. That's well over their 8.5 win total. I thought this would be at least a 9-win over-under, if not 9.5. I love those Super Bowl odds because I do think the upside for this team is still pretty good, even if their defense is never going to be great. And even the division, plus 330. I mean, if Ayuk leaves the Niners and they have a couple injuries, I think all of those are good values on the Rams, which is kind of fun because coming into this, I definitely felt like I was lower on the Rams, yet I still think you can get value on them. Clearly the people are even lower on the Rams, which kind of gets me excited to come into the year high on them after the tragedy of me ranking them 31 last year. But that is going to do it for your Rams deep dive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this ranking on the Rams. And who do you think comes next at the number 11 spot in this series? If you haven't hit that like button yet, please do on the way out. I really appreciate it. It really helps. Other than that, we'll see you for the next deep dive. Peace out.